The city was a sprawling labyrinth of steel and glass, a place where dreams were born and buried every single day. For most, the skyscrapers were symbols of ambition, but for young Leo, they were distant mountains he was never meant to climb. He began his life in the shadows of those giants, a small, invisible figure navigating a world that felt cold and indifferent. His childhood wasn't filled with toys or laughter. It was defined by the rhythmic splash of rain against red brick walls and the sharp bite of hunger that never quite went away. He was the boy who sold newspapers on the corner, his feet bare against the wet pavement, his clothes tattered, but his gaze always fixed on the horizon. People would walk past him, seeing only a statistic or a tragedy, never noticing the fire burning behind his eyes. Every discarded book he found, every scrap of paper with a diagram or a story, became a brick in the foundation of his secret world. He wasn't just surviving the streets, he was studying them, learning the architecture of a life he hadn't yet reached. As the years crawled by, the boy transformed into a young man. But the weight of his reality only grew heavier. He moved from the streets to a cramped, damp basement, a space that felt more like a cage than a home. But inside those four walls, illuminated by the flickering glow of a stolen lantern and a second-hand laptop that buzzed with effort, Leo waged a war against his fate. He worked 2 manual jobs during the day, cleaning floors and hauling crates, just to buy the data and the books he needed to teach himself the language of the elite. There were nights when the exhaustion was so deep, it felt like it was in his bones. Nights when he stared at a stack of rejection letters from universities and firms that wouldn't even look at a candidate from his zip code. He felt the sting of being mocked by those who were born with everything. People who saw his worn-out shoes and assumed he had a worn-out mind. He felt the crushing loneliness of a path that no one else believed in. But in the darkest hours of the night, when the silence of the basement felt absolute, he would look at his sketches and his codes, and he would remind himself that a diamond is just a piece of coal that handled stress exceptionally well. The turning point didn't come with a grand gesture or a stroke of luck. It came through the sheer, stubborn refusal to quit. Leo began taking on tiny freelance design projects under a pseudonym, hiding his identity because he knew the world judged a man by his address before his talent. He designed with a soul that the corporate giants lacked. His structures weren't just buildings, they were stories of resilience. Slowly, the tiny ripples he created turned into waves. He saved every penny, skipped every meal he could, and eventually took the ultimate gamble, launching his own firm from that very same basement. He faced lawsuits from competitors, skepticism from investors, and the constant ghost of his own past telling him he didn't belong. But Leo had a secret weapon. He knew how to survive in the dark, and that made him fearless in the light. He worked while his rivals slept. He researched while they celebrated. He turned every no into fuel and every insult into an obsession for perfection. A decade later, the world finally stopped ignoring him. The man who once shivered on the pavement now stood at the center of boardrooms, his voice steady, his vision undisputed. He had built a legacy on the very things that the world had failed. Today, Leo stands in his office on the highest floor of the tower he designed, a tower that now bears his name. The floor-to-ceiling glass offers a view of the entire world, but his eyes always wander back to that one specific corner down below. The one near the old brick alleyway. You can almost see the ghost of the barefoot boy selling papers in the rain. He doesn't look back with pity, but with a deep silent respect. He touches the cold glass of his window and realizes that the height of his success wasn't measured in feet, but in the depth of he picks up a pen and signs a document that will fund 1,000 scholarships for kids just like him. No, his story wasn't about destiny. It was about the refusal to let the world decide where. The city was a sprawling labyrinth of steel and glass, a place where dreams were born and buried every single day. For most, the skyscrapers were symbols of ambition, but for young Leo, they were distant mountains he was never meant to climb. He began his life in the shadows of those giants, a small, invisible figure navigating a world that felt cold and indifferent. His childhood wasn't filled with toys or laughter. It was defined by the rhythmic splash of rain against red brick walls and the sharp bite of hunger that never quite went away. He was the boy who sold newspapers on the corner, his feet bare against the wet pavement, his clothes tattered, but his gaze always fixed on the horizon. People would walk past him,